really lovely to see everybody here. Selamat pagi, selamat siang, selamat sore, selamat malam, teman-teman di seluruh dunia, and welcome to our August Monash Indonesia seminar. I want to start by acknowledging the custodians of the Kulin lands upon which some of us are placed today, and I pay my respects to the elders of this land, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that claims to sovereignty were never ceded. My name is Sharon Graham-Davies and I'm the director of the Herbie Indonesian Engagement Centre here at Monash. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome everybody today. It's particularly nice to be able to get together when there's not really very much good news circulating and the pandemic seems to be only getting worse and its impacts are being felt on such a devastating level. So it's really lovely that we can all come together here, at least in this format. We're recording this event and it will be made available shortly on our Herbie website. As we go through, I encourage you to type questions into the chat box at any time and we'll come back to these at the end. We'll have a lot of time for questions and answers. Please also follow us on Twitter and Herbie Facebook page to keep up to date on all of our activities. Now, before introducing our illustrious speakers for today, I just want to hand over to Reni, who's going to tell us a little bit about some of the resources we have here at the Monash Library. Thanks, Reni.
Thank you, Sharon. Welcome, everyone. Selamat pagi, selamat siang. It's such a nice day today in Melbourne. It's sunny and yeah, it's really nice. I was able to go outside for a bit. What I'm going to show you today is some of the Indonesian collections that is relevant to the topic that we're going to talk about today. I'm just going to share my screen. So it'll be a quick one. I was looking at one of Pak Dede's book, for example, So Memberi Suara Pada Yang Bisu. We have it in hard copy, Pak Dede. So it just shows you how extensive the Indonesian collection that we have in Monash Library. But also, if you are going to do a bit of browsing about what's available from Pak Dede's book, it's been grouped as homosexuality in Indonesia as a subject heading. So you can actually just click on the link to that subject headings to give you more books on the same topic. So for example, we've got coming out, so Henry Julius' book is also listed there. And there is a journal called Gaya Hidup Ceria, so that's also a very good one. Pak Dede is nodding, so yeah, obviously it's quite an important publication. And there's other books in Indonesian and also in English talking about this specific topic that we have. So we've got LGBT di Indonesia, Perkembangan dan Solusinya, Jadi Kau Tak Merasa Bersalah. There's heaps of different books and also online publication that we have. Yeah, I think if you do want to browse around, have a look at our catalog. The last thing I just want to show you is the Indonesian collection that you can have access from the Indonesian Studies Library Guide. One of them is our extensive newspapers collection. So you see here some of the archival or historical newspapers, and I know Ben is here and he's been using Kompas, so our Kompas newspapers. So that's one of the things that we are very passionate and very proud of, our newspaper collections. And perhaps that's something that you need for your research or teaching purposes. All right, I'm going to hand it over back to Sharon. Thank you.
Thanks, Reni. And nice to see Om Dede's book there, the Memberi Suara Kepada Yang Bisu. It just reminded me of a very early mistake I made in my language, because in Bugis there are bisu with 2 S's, and I remember meeting someone who said, come with me and I'll introduce you to orang bisu, and it was some 6 hours in a bus, and I thought we were meeting the kind of the bisu priests, but we met an orang yang bisu with one S. So that just reminded me of that early field note mistake. And Om Dede, of course, is going to be our first speaker for today, and he'll be no stranger to any of us, I am sure. That is trustee of Gaya Nusantara Foundation, and he's worked tirelessly for decades in the field of LGBT rights and justice in Indonesia, inspiring many of us to pitch in and help with this cause. So Dede, would you like to say a few words? I'll introduce the speakers as we go, and they'll say a few words in turn, and then we'll come together at the end for a bit of Q&A and discussion. So
okay, yeah. Thank you, Sharon. Terima kasih. It's very nice to be back at the Herb Feed Center, although virtually, it's okay. Yeah, and thank you for having me in this seminar. And it's good to see so many friends. And anyway, let me just say that when the pandemic hit us, we were like everybody else. We were actually not ready, obviously. So we were not sure what to do and things like that. But then quickly, the first thing that obviously came to us, I mean, for our use, is actually well, what we're doing right now: Zoom, Google Meet, WhatsApp group, and an Instagram Live. So suddenly we don't have to think about plane fares and hotel accommodation or anything. We could do seminars, like this one. And the good thing is we could involve people in remote areas, Maumere, Ambon, Ternate, you name it, as long as there is some internet connection, people can do it, and most people do not tune in or using a computer. They would use the ubiquitous smartphone. I mean only people who are too old, like my mother, don't have smartphones. So anyway, so that's something that we discovered quickly. And I know there are people here amongst the audience who could also share their stories of using that. And suddenly you have these virtual meetings, Queer Language Club, and then there's Queer Indonesia Archive. There's all these initiatives. I mean, Henry is going to, I don't want to steal his show. Actually, Henry and a few friends actually managed to edit a book, but I'll stop there. No spoiler. Yeah, so that's a good thing. And of course, with the I can't even, I've actually lost track. Probably the wave that happened in July. Many people, for example, in my organization, half of our activists turned positive for COVID. Fortunately, at least in our organization, of course, we can't say that for other organizations. Nobody was severely ill, and people quickly recovered. And then vaccination. Now, when we talk about vaccinations and prevention, this is where our HIV work that we started in the 90s has actually taught us lessons about getting ready for a pandemic, for epidemic, for disease. So no issue with vaccination. Vaccinations are welcome, and the connection in the hospitals of our so-called case managers is really useful. So if there's one, at least in Surabaya, if there's one person who needs to be in the hospital, in Indonesia, and maybe in other places as well, connections are important. So if you know the doctors in the hospitals, it becomes easier. Now, coming back to the impact, as you could probably imagine, the trans women, transpuan waria, we could debate. I mean, Ben Hegarty is here, But anyway, you know what I mean. People like Ibu Finolia, in Jakarta, they quickly, started some fundraising and something very practical, by selling masks, because everybody has to wear a mask, right? So people sell masks, and it's a good thing that international friends have also contributed. There's actually right now I'll just show it quickly, a campaign to. Okay, I'll share the screen just for 10 seconds or so. So here's if you want to see the complete one, you could go to Instagram of Humane Magazine. I'll type in the URL in the chat box later. But there's also a GoFundMe link for that. So please, if you can share a few dollars or rupiah, any amount would help. I think we've actually compiled. This is actually a consortium called the Crisis Response Mechanism. I think Allegra is there too, right? And Nusantara and Kebaya, Ben must know Kebaya, the organization in Yogyakarta, and Sanggar Seroja, which is a trans organization in Jakarta. So anyway, later I'll type in the chat box the GoFundMe link. And lastly, yeah, I mean, I think I've said everything, but the idea is that, one last thing. What we've learned from which actually we'd like to share with, I don't know, and Allegra is a medical doctor, so she could actually talk about that too, is how the handling of COVID-19 can learn actually from HIV. Stigma, for example, is still there, and because of stigma, people sometimes don't go to the hospitals and things like that. So, but it's things are happening too quickly, maybe. So maybe we can discuss that later. I mean, how actually, instead of just learning from HIV for ourselves, and we could actually share it with the general public. Although it's not everybody. Okay, that's enough from me.
That's great. A lovely lead-in for our next speaker, who, as Dede mentioned, is a real doctor, someone who's quite actually helpful in emergencies. And so our next speaker is Dr. Allegra Walter, and her work has had a real community focus, and looks in particular at different ways, different mental health, sexual health campaigns, and just like Dede, has inspired many to try and make the world a better place in this really difficult field. So, Dr. Allegra, silakan.
Thank you so much, Sherry, and also Mas Dede for the introduction. Let me share my slide, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. I think this is the first time we're meeting the team from Melbourne, Monash University. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay. Today, I want to share more about the work of Suara Kita in terms of LGBTIQ activism that we have here in Indonesia, and also some other organizations that were supporting us, whether it came in the form of charity or donations or any other practical solutions to this pandemic. So first of all, I would like to start with my quote-unquote favorite statement that COVID-19 affects everyone, but it does not affect us equally. Because especially for LGBT plus individuals, we have what we call as the legacy of adversities, in which it came in the disparity in economic, education, health, legal, and human rights. Even I think a few years ago, the Williams Institute, UCLA, they announced research on how much money that the Indonesian economic have lost because of the discrimination towards LGBT plus individuals. It ranges from 900 million to 1 or 2 billion US dollars, which is a lot of money. And it costs lives as well. And during this pandemic, the main highlight that happened towards the gender and sexual minority came from the loss of income. We see that a lot of LGBT plus individuals, they work in service-based sectors, non-formal works. So it is more likely to lose a lot of their income due to this pandemic. And one of the example is the research from the Indonesia Transgender Network or Jaringan Transgender Indonesia, GTID, that around 58% of trans women have, trans individuals have lost their income. This research was last year. And ironically, there were a lot of barriers in terms of support as well. Only 27% for the trans population, the support came from the government. The race came from other organizations. So only a third of the support came from the government, and we've seen barriers as well. When trans individuals or LGBT plus individuals who express themselves differently, they want to access the support from Ministry of Social Security, like let's say, and they it is because of the blatant discrimination due to their identity, or because they don't have specific legal ID requirements that they want these individuals to have. And we've seen some discrimination and violence, and what Mas Dede have mentioned before is also correct. Around 23% globally, I think people living with HIV has lost their access to HIV care due to this COVID-19 fiasco. And from the good news, from the better side, the more positive side, we've seen some changes in our government sector. We have a history that has been made due to the collaboration with the Directorate General of Population and Civil Registration, Ministry of Home Affairs, that collaborated with Suara Kita as well as other organizations specific to transgender population, Serikandi Sejati Foundation, Forum Komunikasi Waria Indonesia, and also Indonesia AIDS Coalition. They are willing to facilitate, especially trans individuals, in accessing legal ID, family card, and birth certificates. And of course, this great access to health that is very important in this pandemic. Allow me to briefly explain about the condition here. There is this cultural phenomenon, maybe in Indonesia and also some other countries, that a lot of trans individuals, when they came out when they were younger, or when they don't feel like they were accepted by their family or their social circle, they might be kicked out or even go out of their homes early when they were younger. So they don't have any legal ID with them. So when they enter the city, they are more focused in the survival part of life, whether it's doing survival work, survival sex work, or any other any means necessary to fulfill their lives needs. So this legal ID card is not their main priority, and also there were barriers as well when they were trying to access the legal ID card from the government as well as the other social spectrum. For example, if they want to ask for the address where they live, they have to give the data to the government, and they don't get that permission from their local leaders, for example. And of course, due to this pandemic, it is very important to have legal ID for vaccination as well as health insurance as well. For other positive things that we can embrace here is about the solidarity aspect. We've seen a lot of charity organizations, initiations that happened during the past 1.5 to 2 years, I think, during this pandemic. Just like what Mas Dede have mentioned before, the crisis coalesces mechanism, I think this is one of the largest. They distribute the essential health supplies and also food. But then again, this is what we call as survival, because this is not thriving. And some other organizations from smaller organizations. So seeing about all the things that happened during 1.5 years of this pandemic, we see a lot of opportunities as well as the things that we can do in the future. For the short term, it is very important for us to support the community initiatives in terms of donation, charity, legal ID facilitation, and other new initiatives that can happen. We need to use the online momentum to access more people in terms of educational initiatives, just like what we are doing right now, and also community engagement and campaigns. But then again, this will access most people, but sometimes not a lot of people will get the access to internet, as well as good supportive gadget to do webinars, for example. So then again, this is something that we need to think about, because when it comes to digitalizing our movement, we need to think about those who are severely marginalized and they didn't have really good access to this. In the long term, I think when it comes to research and advocacy, we can collaborate between countries or even between continents. And we need to adapt to the intersectional lens and be specific in what kind of community that we want to target. For example, gender and sexual minority women might have different needs than gay men, for example. And we need to have empowerment programs that is not solely focused on HIV, but we need to focus more on the empowerment aspect and also human rights, whether it's education, economic health, because as we see, health is not only health, because it is very interconnected with other branch of life as well. And also the continuous funding that we need to have, as well as encouraging the economic independence of community-based organizations that maybe Associate Professor Irwan can explain later on. I think this is my last slide, and hopefully we can have fruitful discussion about, as what Mas Dede mentioned before, about the connection between COVID-19, HIV, and also LGBTIQ+ community needs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Allegra. Such incredible work, and you're just everywhere on social media trying to really push this message. So thank you for all of those incredible efforts. And again, a nice lead in for Irwan. So our next speaker is Dr. Iron Hirayana, who's an anthropologist based at the University of Indonesia. And Irwan has worked extensively in the field of sexual and gender rights, publishing and advocating in this field for many years. So silakan, Prof.
Thank you, Sherin. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you also for having me in this webinar. Maybe I just quickly I need to continue from what Allegra presentation. So let me share my few slides. Okay. Have you seen my slide?
It says you're sharing, but it's just, I've got a blank screen, just black screen.
Just a bit slow, maybe.
Yeah. Is it loading?
Yep, it's loading now.
Yeah, sudah.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I think I want to talk about the what's experience of the LGBT organization, the Suara Kita, and then but specifically on their activity on the fundraising. So this is a bit before the pandemic. Actually, the Suara Kita has a fundraising program for the aim is actually for the community self-reliant. Yeah, so they really want to start how to not really dependent on the donor institution. So they start an activity what they call it the Sri Kandes. Sri Kandes is actually derived from the Sri Kandi, is a figure in the what shadow puppet wayang, the Mahabharata, and then it actually start Sri Kandes start by selling the traditional clothes, yeah, from everywhere in Indonesia. So before the pandemic, they usually do this fundraising by selling in the conference or seminars, events, yeah. So they open the booth and then they try to sell to the conference or the seminar participant. And then, this started in, I think, in 2018, yeah. And then, but after the pandemic start, and then I mean, of course, they cannot open the booth because there's everybody we are in the lockdown. So and then they start they have an idea how about collecting the pre-love. So they start to collecting the pre-love, and then they have the idea and then to selling the pre-love to the public. And then now they have what they call it the Sri Love. Not Sri Kandes is still there, but they have the Sri Love. And what interesting for me is because in the pandemic, this fundraising is they are actively using the social media, especially on the Facebook. So anything, yeah. So dress, shoes, bags, blanket, bed cover, you name it, and then that's all the pre-love, and then they sell to the public through the live on Facebook. So they did, I think, 2 or 3 times a week, and then I think they are able to get some fund to do their activities. And then the question is asked, who are the beneficiaries of this fundraising? Until now, first, of course, they give but the beneficiary is the poor and the elderly transgender women. Yeah. So like Allegra mentioned before. So I mean, for example, it's not only for the transgender in Jakarta, but also in Banten, even in Jogja, yeah. Because Suara Kita also collaborate with other organizations. And the second, also the victims of the sexual violence. Yeah. If it's because they need, for example, the paralegal, and then how to give the psychological support, for example, yeah. And another beneficiary is also the dropout children at the Bidara Cina flats. This flats where when they do the live on for the pre-love on Facebook, and then they try also to help the dropout children, yeah, at the flats, yeah. And then through the program Paket Belajar from Indonesian government, yeah. And of course, they also I think about 6 months ago they start also the shelter for the transgender women. Yeah, I think the shelter is in Bekasi, and then they build the shelter for the transgender women, including the elderly transgender. So I think so what is the lesson learned from this this initiative, yeah, during the pandemic. So I think first is how the Suara Kita can maintaining and managing the community network, yeah, and then also they can expanding the friendship, because through the the Sri Love activity, using the social media, they have the new friend, the new network, yeah. But I think also the most interesting is also how actually the pandemic opening the space, yeah, for the public solidarity and care, yeah. So people donating the pre-love, but people also buying the pre-love, yeah. And then it's also what's related to how the government see this activity, because for example, when Suara Kita building the shelter for the transgender women, and then the Office of the Social Affairs, for example, in Bekasi, visited them, and then offering the program, yeah, from the government to collaborate for the shelter, for example. But then another thing I think also important is how actually through this activity, this can also building the self-reliance in the LGBT community. So I think there's some point that I need to emphasize in this my presentation. Thank you very much, Sherin.
Thank you, Mas Iwan, and thank you again for all of this incredible work that you're doing at such a challenging time indeed. So our next speaker is Stephanie Hallim, and Stephanie has been working as an activist with various organizations, both in the private sector and in the non-profit sector, and is making an incredible difference on the ground in people's everyday lives. So Stephanie, silakan.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Clearly? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, I can. First of all, thank you very much for all of the presentation. I think what I will be talking about much closely related to what Allegra has been explaining before, but I think I want to go deeply and more focus on family acceptance, because I think it's not really often it's being emphasized a lot about the importance of family acceptance, because I want to argue here that family acceptance is really important to break the cycles of the suffering that trans people has experienced in Indonesia, and especially during this COVID-19 pandemic, because just like Allegra already explained, that without the ID, it's really impossible for trans people to access healthcare and also jobs with dignity. And why family acceptance is important, I think I'm not trying to pigeonholing the situation and saying that this is the only factor that can solve all the problem, but I think this is a major contribution that can help trans people to not only surviving but also thriving. Why? Because basically family acceptance can provide basic, solid for people to grow, not only physically, but also mentally. It really gives you the modalities for people to better cope with their life. I know the world is already cruel enough, even for non-trans people. So can you imagine for trans people? So yeah, and I think for sociologists, they will call it like family can provide the social capital that can help and enable people to grow, of course. And it's really challenging because in Indonesia, we have this shame culture that I think family acceptance becomes even more urgent to the trans-specific trans community, because I think compared to the LGB, the family acceptance for trans people is really, really prevalent. We can say that the prevalence is very low, because you know, for trans people, when it comes to transition and physical appearance, it's really shown up compared to the, let's say, gay man or lesbian woman, where the expression of the sexuality is only is limited on the personal space, but for the public space, I'm not saying that gay men or lesbian women cannot express them publicly, but I mean it's easier for them to hide it compared to trans people. But I think also practically, administratively, family acceptance is important, because I think in Indonesia, in order to have ID, it's very important for us to have family cards. So that's why when you are rejected or you are forced to be out at home, it's really impossible for trans people to access this administrative procedure that basically makes trans people in a similar condition actually with the internally displaced person, because basically when trans people don't have ID, we are stateless. So, but I think the problem also with family acceptance for trans people is a social economic factor in Indonesia, because we still have the mindset or the value of thinking that children are the ones that will help us when we grow old, because I think that so many people can rely too much on government pension or whatever we call it. So when we see children as an investment for our future, and then we realize that our children are trans, it somehow becomes a judgment that our children will not be able to support our old time or older parents. So that's why the prejudice that children are socially crippled in the beginning will just reinforce the vicious circle that trans people have. So that's why I think it's becoming even more important, because without the family acceptance, it will make trans people to live even more in a very difficult situation. So, but then again, with the fear of family acceptance in Indonesia is very low, it will just create this unchanging dilemma. When I was working with Asia Pacific Transgender Network, I learned a lot of issues about trans people, like legal gender recognition, their psychopathologization, etc. But however, I didn't realize that why such things is not even common in Indonesia, because I think the situation in Indonesia is really that bad, because I think basically trans people are stateless. I think this is very important. I know there's a good change, like Allegra already mentioned that, and there's a huge discussion among the society that, oh, this is the ID for transgender, because when they heard about ID for transgender, they thought that it will be the gender marker will be X or O or specific for trans people, but actually no, it's a very basic ID card where the gender markers still show the gender assigned at birth. I think we are still really a few steps left behind from other people in another country, where they can already talk about legal gender recognition, where they can talk about access for transition, but actually the basic need for even ID is really just something that we are newly introduced by the government now, which I think still needs to be celebrated. But however, there are still a lot of things that we need to do. And once again, I think it's really, really important to promote family acceptance, because without it, it's almost the issues will be only for surviving for trans people only, not yet to the thriving. I think that's the point for me.
Thank you, Stephanie. Really important, critical points there. Like without ID, you know, being effectively stateless and not able to claim any of the rights or privileges of being part of that society. Our final speaker before we go to the Q&A is Mas Hendry Julius Wijaya. Hendry is a scholar and prolific Indonesian author, publishing in both English and Indonesian on gender, sexuality, cultural politics, and has made an incredible impact with his writing and intervention. So, lucky last, Hendry, silakan.
Thank you, Sharon, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. In the following 5 minutes, I would like to rethink how queer studies as an intellectual project and academic discipline operates in Indonesia. Historically emerged in the 1990s, queer studies has emerged as a field of study in the US that in general continuously challenges the fixity of gender and sexuality and explore the relationships between queer politics and race, ethnicity, class, neoliberalism, and colonialism. Academic courses, academic publications and journals like GLQ, and various handbooks of queer studies published by Routledge indicate the institutionalization of queer studies as an academic discipline in the US and also perhaps globally. The questions arising from this landscape is how queer studies have or might operate in Indonesia, which does not share a similar intellectual and historical trajectory as the US queer studies. In some courses offered by, for example, Department of Cultural Studies, Media Studies, and Literary Studies in some Indonesian universities, the lecturers integrated several theoretical strands of queer studies like Judith Butler, Michel Foucault, Jack Halberstam, etc. However, in the absence of institutionalization of queer studies in Indonesia, and also the hostility toward queer issues in Indonesian academic settings, I would like to invite you all to look beyond the academia itself. I want to ask, what kinds of new itinerary or new possibility for queer studies if it's allowed to flourish beyond the academic institution? Move beyond the academic institutions means to look at the networks of knowledge in which actors, platforms or places or audience facilitate the circulation of knowledge. In other words, bookshops, community learning activities, publishers, online platforms, video and podcasts have become central and prominent in the knowledge productions and distributions in the internet era. Recently, between 2018 to 2021, I have witnessed the proliferation of queer studies related knowledge dissemination in non-traditional spaces. For example, Pos Santa and Transit Santa, two independent bookshops located in Jakarta, have promoted consistently queer-related books. Another instance is coming from Panggung Minoritas, a grassroots community learning activity. The members of Panggung Minoritas, in one instance, read and discussed queer texts like Jack Halberstam's The Art of Queer Failure, an academic text, but they connected this text with their experience. If English is often a main problem in engaging with international or global queer texts, EA Books, an independent publisher based in Yogyakarta, has released a special series called Seri Queer or Queer Series. With this infrastructure in place, it is indeed expected that queer studies or queer discussions in Indonesia can flourish in printed forms, and such discussions will also form meaningful dialogues with queer theoretization from other countries, not only from the US. Online platforms have also become a fertile ground to disseminate queer knowledge. Cerita Trans or trans stories, for example, serve as a site to tell stories about the embodiment, struggles, and the lives of transgender people. Personal stories here are, of course, a form of situated knowledge, if I may quote the cultural theorist Donna Haraway. These examples are not exhaustive, but they are possible new itineraries of or where knowledge can be queer and flourish beyond the traditional mode of academic institutions. It is all because queerness, like any other form of knowledge, trespasses, transforms, and transmute. The last thing to highlight here is that we, in Indonesia, continue moving beyond the simple binary of oppress and empower. Because, hey, put on your callous palm and go on and get back out into the world, because there is nothing more tragic than a sad queer. Thank you. Thank you.
That was a great ending, Hendry. Thank you. That was great. Well, thank you to all of our 5 speakers. I'd love to open it up now for a bit of Q&A and discussion. You can direct your questions to any of the panelists or a general question, and we can see who would like to go first. Now, as always, people are sometimes slow to get questions, and then we get to the o'clock and we run out. So do get your questions in now. Anita, are there any questions?
There is already a few. The
right.
First one, a question, has the pandemic slowed or accelerated action on the proposed anti-LGBT legislation in the parliament? I guess any one of the speakers would like to address this?
Mas Dede dulu mungkin atau?
Mas Dede mungkin?
Well, I mean, this is where you can be technical. Look at the text of the bill, and actually it has no specific mention of same-sex activities being criminalized. So that's something that was actually from the 2019, I think, text. Yeah. As far as I know, maybe others, Allegra or Henry or Mas Irwan know. It is not urgently on the what is it, on the agenda of Parliament right now. What Parliament is tinkering with is the bill on the elimination of sexual violence. As I was, I mean, in about 5 minutes ago, I saw, I haven't read it, but apparently the Conservatives are actually, are making the text even more conservative. But yeah, so it doesn't, it's not there. I mean, and the new criminal code has other problems as well. It actually reinforces the authoritarian nature of the regime, insulting the president and things like that. And that seems to be to receive people's attention when protesting. So I don't think it's going to be tabled again anytime soon, but I may be wrong.
Maybe I would like to jump in and add. I think if I'm not mistaken, the anti-LGBT bill was the family resilience bill, the RUU Ketahanan Keluarga, in which, if you have like gender diverse or sexually diverse family members, you have to report them, those kind of things. I think it was being dropped off by the Parliament last year. But actually, the one that is still progressing right now is the what have Dr. Dede mentioned before, the anti-sexual violence bill, which was being fastened during this pandemic. And I think that's a very low approach from the government. In the middle of pandemic, they're trying to change or even try to set aside the anti-sexual violence bill, which is an irony because during this pandemic, the sexual violence, domestic violence rose rapidly for women, minorities, as well as the high stressful and also depression rates and trauma in all genders, in all men, women, children as well. I think that's my input.
Thank you. All right, we might go to the next question. And I've just noticed we've got someone zooming in from Fiji, which sounds pretty warm place, hopefully near a beach somewhere. Our next question is from Bo. Thank you. What do the speakers think of the growth of non-queer community-initiated support fundraisers for trans communities in Indonesia, such as the recent BTS Army campaign? I don't know, Stephanie or Allegra, who would like to?
Allegra knows more about that.
I know the BTS, Stephanie, maybe?
Well, I mean, I'm not really a K-pop fan, to be honest, but I think, I mean, if the aim to help trans people, of course, why should we reject it? Even though I think, of course, the current program or current fundraising effort is really just tackle the first layer of the problem. I still think that we still really need to address the main problem that trans people currently experiencing in Indonesia. But I think I want to add also the previous question. I think the family resilience bill is also still looming in our and still needs our attention. But also I think this is also another thing that not really so many people get to understand, that also I think the Parliament creating this law for mental health experts that will give more authority to the local mental health professional in Indonesia that can indirectly affect for LGBT community. Why? Because I think when they have more authority, they will try to ignore themselves from the international guidelines where there is this international trend to depathologize homosexuality and trans people. With the greater autonomy, I think it will be also another problem, but I think it's not really well known in general public yet. I don't know why, but I think for someone who studied psychology, it's really impacting us who understand about mental health capacity. But I think that's for me. But yeah, I mean, every fundraising to help trans people, of course, help really appreciate it, because I think the main aim for us here is for the social integration.
Yeah.
Terima kasih, Stephanie.
And I would like to add to Stephanie, sorry for me to jump in, about the pathologization for trans individuals. I think the Indonesian version of DSM, the PPDGJ number 3 revised, you can Google. It is still written as gender identity disorder. So they acknowledge that they are referring to the DSM-5, but they're still using the gender identity disorder label. And the healthcare, especially for mental health care and also transition related care, is not widely available here in Indonesia. We've seen some mental health professionals who were open-minded, but there were a lot of others who were not. So it is not a standardized practice, which is a problem, because sometimes a lot of trans youth, they came to me through DMs or something like that. They asked about the access to transition or mental health practitioners. They were open-minded. So it is something that they have to become the advocate for themselves, which is, I think, as adults, we have the capacity and also the moral responsibility to be able to help them in terms of regulations and also healthcare in general. And the transition-related care is still very medicalized. We're still referring to the Vivian Rubianti, the first trans women who were undergoing the sex change and also the gender transition in public. We are still referring to that guideline, which was very medicalized in 1970 and the 80s something, compared to what we have now, which is more inclusive and not acting as a gatekeeper in the process.
Yeah, makasih, Allegra. Anita, do you want to read the next one?
Yeah, well, this one is a long one with a bit of background to leading to the question. So Amar Hidayatullah has a very interesting discussion so far. I'd like to locate a discussion on LGBTQI+ rights in a broader political context in Indonesia. While statistical data of violence against women in Indonesia and globally has shown increased incidence of VAW during the pandemic, I assume that violence against LGBTQI+ community is more severe, yet it is not being well documented. So the question is, do LGBTQI+ movements involved in the advocacy of elimination of sexual violence bill, and why? I guess this is a bit of a follow-up from the previous question. Anyone would like to address that?
Anyone?
Yes.
I don't know.
Start with you, Ale.
I have few points in the past. Over the, I think last month or 2 months ago, the APTN, maybe Stephanie, if you heard of this, can also add, the APTN started to gather the data from community-based organizations on the violence that's happening, who help these individuals and who records them. And I think we got an interview. I help as a translator with Vina from Sanggar Suara, the trans women youth organization here in Greater Jakarta. I agree with the data that it's not widely available, but it is no secret that the rate towards violence is high. And of course, it's not only coming from the family or social spectrum in school, bullying and so on, but also from the government sectors, which is quite blatantly happening in some parts of it. For Indonesia, for example, like in Aceh, I think last year or 2 years ago, we've seen like trans women being stripped naked and being hosed down by water with coming from the government institutional bodies, which is an irony. Maybe someone would like to add.
I think I would love to add. I think in the recent time, the initial lockdown, there's a transgender woman who were burned alive until she died. But before that, I helped to documenting the extreme violence that is experienced by trans women specifically. where there is a alarming trend, the increasing murder of trans people. So, like I've explained before, that when, and also I later also explained that not some, but most of trans women were forced to get out from their home, and so perhaps that can give the assumption that maybe during the lockdown, or if they're away from their family, then they don't experience violence. But then again, the data that I collected show that when they work as sex worker, either the client or the intimate partner are the perpetrator for the violence against transgender women. And I think it's also increasing with the trend of the Islamic heart political agenda, not really trend, but the hardliner of Islamic, the what party called the conservatives, maybe, but I think it's more the hardliners. That with the growing intolerance of religious intolerance, it's also aligned with the growing intolerance for LGBT community. And the data from what I collected, 2014 to 2019, there's an increasing number of trans murder in Indonesia, and that's from the secondary data, which I hope maybe in the future we can have more funding to do the actual data collection. But I think, yeah, there is a trend, even without pandemic, the growing violence is already there, especially with the intolerance that grows in Indonesia. So I think if we can have more support, funding, resource, human resource as well, I think we can have better data collection. But at the moment, even from the anecdotal or secondary data, it shows the trends already.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. We've got 3 questions, but 2 minutes, so I might just choose the one that Hendry has already very kindly offered to answer. And I'll go straight to you, Hendry. You'll probably address the question rather than me taking time to read it. So you've got 2 minutes. Silakan.
Okay, thank you. So I'm interested to answer about LGBTIQ enterprise and private sector. So now I'm working with private sectors in the issue of sustainable finance. And usually because of this initiative of sustainable finance, actually stock exchanges, companies, and also profit organizations are pushed to mainstream diversity and inclusion. Mostly companies are still focused on women inclusion into the workplace and also the representation of women in board of directors. This is an international financial governance phenomena that has been also permeated into Indonesian business landscape. And in some cases, as I have witnessed, some multinational / more innovative local companies like financial technology companies are increasingly recognized and have policy on LGBTIQ employees to protect their recruitment and also to ensure the fair treatment of them in the companies. But of course, this kind of information often cannot be accessed by people outside of the organizations because of the sensitivity issue. So now, if you are interested to learn about the ecosystem of LGBTIQ people in economic settings, I think it is very important to look at this new emerging financial governance phenomenon. Lastly, my answer here is only to map out the ecosystem. I'm not engaging my critique of neoliberalism or capitalism. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Hendry, and look at that, perfectly on time. So really, I just want to say thank you so much to all of our speakers today. It's just been a really incredible to hear all of that work and amongst all of that devastation, such a lot of positive stories of community coming together. So thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to Lauren, Anita and Rennie for all of your help. And please join us next month. We have Professor Lynette Russell, who's coming to talk to us about global encounters and looking at connections between Indigenous Australia and Indonesia a long time ago. So that'll be really interesting to look at those historical connections between us. Oh, so thank you all very much. Do try and stay safe and sane and be kind in this really challenging time, and hopefully we'll see you all next month. Terima kasih.